Howdy, howdy, Chris here. Welcome back to Garage Noise. Today I'm going to share with you how to fill small door dings quick and easy.
So let's get into it.
Okay, so these are the dents we want to take care of today. This is a Chevy Colorado. We're doing some repairs on the front part of this door and the rear part of the fender. So these dings were not part of the estimate. There's not something we're responsible for. Typically, this is not something we would take care of. It's not part of the estimate. And if it was a different color, we probably wouldn't take care of it. But because it's straight black, we're not going to have any problems with the color match. We're going to go ahead and quickly repair these for the customer so we don't have these ugly looking dents in our paint job. So the first thing I want to do is I want to evaluate this dent. It's a really small ding, but it did raise the metal a little bit around that dent. So when a dent's created, it raises the metal around it. So what we want to do is just tap that down just a little bit. We don't want to create any more dents, but we just want to level that metal out a little bit before we sand this and fill it. So I'm going to take my hammer and I'm going to tap down around the edge of that dent and level it out just a bit before we fill it. The next step is to prepare this paint for filler. For that, we're going to use 80 grit sandpaper. 80 grit sandpaper is going to create a coarse enough scratch that's going to allow that body filler to adhere to the painted surface. I'll start by sanding the paint inside this little ding and make sure that's properly prepped out for filler. Now we're going to go ahead and sand the surrounding area of the dent with 80 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to do it by hand here, scuff it up a little bit, about 2 inches around that dent. You could use an orbital sander or a DA if you chose, but this just makes it easy. You only want to sand the area that you're going to apply filler over. I want to clean the surface before we apply our filler. I'm just using some spraywood glass cleaner. You can use wax and grease remover or isopropyl alcohol. This is the product we're using today. It's the USC Icing. It's a polyester glazing putty. Works perfectly for small dings or waves in your body filler or pinholes. Just a good product that sands very easy. I'll mix our filler on this paper palette. These are very handy for a clean surface to mix your filler on. And you can just pull the sheet off after you used it. It's disposable and it comes with like 150 or 100 sheets. It also comes with this Bondo spreader, and this Bondo spreader actually happens to be the perfect size that we want to use for this ding. We'll add a little bit of icing to our palette. We're not going to need a ton of product to fill these dings. We'll also need to add a hardener. Now the hardener mixes up 50 to 1 or 2% by volume. So it just takes a little bit for this amount of icing. You want to knead your hardener while it's in the tube. Make sure it's mixed up thoroughly before you apply it to your palette. I'll mix my icing by folding it in till it's all one uniform color and there's no streaks. Try to avoid stirring your filler. That could introduce air to your filler and cause pinholes in your repair.
Now we're going to scoop up a small amount on the edge of my spreader. Now we're just going to press it in to our dent. And making sure the edges are smooth. Now when I go over it again, I'm going to lighten up on the pressure and allow that filler to fill those little dings.
After about 15 or 20 minutes, our icing has cured and we're able to sand it. So I'm going to use some 180 grit sandpaper on a small block and we're going to block it in all different directions. This is going to help to level out that dent and give us the best results. Now you could start off with 80 and just knock it down, but this icing is designed to be sanded with 180 grit sandpaper, and that's a benefit because you want to use the least aggressive sandpaper possible when you're sanding filler. So after we sand it with 180, we'll switch over to 320 grit sandpaper to refine those 180 grit scratches and get it ready for primer. Now that we have the filler sanded with the 180 grit sandpaper, we have it knocked down and pretty much straight. We're going to switch over to 320 grit sandpaper to refine those 180 grit scratches. Now, if you chose and if you were in a hurry, you could use an orbital sander for this and just knock it down with 180 and then switch over to 320. I always like to recommend that you use a block when you're blocking over dents to make sure that dent gets straight. A mistake I see from a lot of beginners is sanding too much filler out of that dent. Remember, you're using the filler to create a gradual transition from the dented area to the rest of the panel. So you need a thin coat of filler not only over the dented area, but the surrounding area as well. That gives you a smooth transition on that panel, helps you get it flat and straight. To check your work, use the flat portion of your hand and run quickly over the dent. Then you can feel any imperfections. And this is a skill you want to develop so you're able to feel those high and low areas as you run your hand over the repair. You could also use guide coat to help you analyze whether you have the dent straight.
Now in this case, we're going to sand this with 600, remove any of those 320 grit scratches because we're going to just put a little bit of sealer over this before we paint it. Okay, so we sanded over this with some 600 grit sandpaper, and this repair is ready to be sealed and painted. Now you could primer it. The sealer we use is a primer sealer, and because this is such a small area and I finished sand it with 600, I'm okay with putting just some sealer over this before we go ahead and apply our paint. If it concerns you, then go ahead and put some primer on it, let it dry, sand it out, and then paint it.
Because I needed to apply some more primer to the front part of this fender, I went ahead and masked this off, and we put a thin coat of primer over this door ding.
So we are going to blow a little bit of primer on this before we paint it. Gun settings, 2 turns out from closed on the fluid volume. Fan pattern is narrowed from wide open about halfway. Our air pressure is set at 12 psi, but I'm going to control the amount that's coming out of the gun by the trigger and the overspray. So I'm not going to pull this trigger all the way. We'll turn this air pressure down. That's a little bit much. We just need a thin coat over this. And then we'll just do a final sand that with 600, and it'll be ready for paint.
Listen, if you want to learn some more tips and techniques on working with body filler and how to repair some larger dents in your project or even paint it, check out one of these videos now. I appreciate each and every one of you watching, and we'll see you next time on Garage Noise.